الكنترول أخوي إبراهيم. I think they need. الحين أحسن. الأخوي خالد. الأخوي خالد حذيفة. Audience to be aware, I was online since 4:55, so I was making sure to join this distinguished gathering, and I do apologize. I won't be able to stay more than 5 minutes with you, and I'm sure you will be doing very well. In the beginning, I would like to welcome our distinguished guests, all of you, and extend a special appreciation for your contribution with your experience and knowledge for our group and our friend in Parkinson friend group, and especially our leader, who is the founder of this group, Mr. Khaled, Mr. Hudayfa, for his initiative and continuous sustainable follow-up with whatever is going on with Parkinson. Allow me to focus within few minutes on the whole intention of UAE Genetic Disease Association. For those who doesn't know us, we are non-profitable, non-governmental organization. We were established back in 2004 as a goodwill for the soul of the founder of UAE, His Highness Sheikh Zayed, Allah yarhamah. And proudly, I am a volunteer on board as a founder of the organization, as well as the chairperson of the board. In the past 16 years, we were overwhelmed with the great support of the community for all our initiatives and projects, which was initiated based on the big demand and the need in regards to increase awareness about common genetic disorders in our country. And at the same time, we came up with across many cases and disorders within the community, which previously were not aware. The community were not aware about the link between genetics and these disorders. And today, Parkinson disorder is one of those disorders where, with a great advance in medicine and science, we came to know the strong link to specific disorders in relation to Parkinson. And here I would like to lend an insight into the genetic background of Parkinson and to shade some myth revolving around Parkinson as well. We cannot say that Parkinson it is an inherited disorder, but simply for sure it is a genetic disorder. And when we say genetic disorder, there is a genetic element, a mutation somewhere along the nucleus and the DNA itself, after which the cell itself will be not able to perform in the normal way where it should be. So the protein which will be secreted to form a specific part in our brain will have some error. So it might be genetic, but not necessarily inherited. This is a very important fact to know about it. And at the same time, nowadays, with again further advance in medicine, we are focusing so much on epigenetics, where we are trying to find out the correlation between a specific environmental or external factor and the genetic makeup of us. And here I would like to encourage everyone who's hearing us, regardless if you did the genetic disorder or not, if you've done it and there is no specific mutation which increase your risk for developing Parkinson disorder, I wish if you can continue donating a blood sample of your blood or a part and being involved in the international clinical research. As we know now with epigenetics, we are trying to figure out some of those factors where, for example, if somebody is carrying the mutation of Parkinson or Parkinson, one of the Parkinson disorders mutation, but he doesn't have the symptom and sign, here where it will be a very interesting case and it will be a good startup where we can brighten the whole future of the patient with Parkinson as well as their families. So we can work out on those factors which switch off this gene even if we carry it. Here where we would like to make sure that we will have a better understanding about the local factor or some of those elements which makes us genetically so unique being in the Middle East. And similar is applied on our colleagues and our brothers and sisters elsewhere in the world. So the whole future of Parkinson and other health disorders, inshallah, will be depending purely, additional to the genetics for sure, but as well as the epigenetic, here where the pharmacogenomics, so we will have a better understanding to develop a very specific medication which will improve the quality of the patient's life as well as of early detection, and in the same time enforcing the preventive tool which should be available, and we will make sure that it will be accessible and affordable by the high-risk group. This is a very brief introduction, and I'm sure majority of our distinguished guests are aware about it, and they have their own experience to shed more light on other areas related to the clinical management of the Parkinson disorders. And wish you all the best. And I will be with you for a few minutes if somebody would like to have any clarification or further comment on those points I mentioned earlier. I cannot hear anything, Mr. Hudayfa.
Thank you, Dr. A few words.
Hello, thank you, Her Highness, Dr. Mariam Matar. It's Vinod Mehta. Very nice hearing you today. And able to hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, right. And yeah, thank you. Today, actually, I'm very delighted to share with you the hard work the team and the volunteers from Parkinson's UAE been done since last 2 years. And I'm just going to give a quick snapshot of 171 patients and clinically, phenotypically, the exciting results we have noticed. If you have a few minutes, I just have a quick run through about the hard work done by so many young talents in the country here. I want to thank everyone, and I just want to share a screen just to share with you. And I would like to thank Prof. Chowdhury here, our director at King's, and Guy Chung Fei, Anna, and also all the King's Movement Disorders team is here. Thank you all for coming here, and also patients. A few patients are here and joining, and also I would like to thank Dr. Dani, who's giving us a full support to encouraging the research at King's Dubai. So just want to show you what we've been doing. So basically,
and Dr. Vinod, I would like to take this opportunity before I leave. I want to invite you to be one of our speakers in our upcoming conference in November, along with Professor Ray, to share such wealth and knowledge about Parkinson with the rest of the audience and participant in the upcoming 8th International Genetic Disorder Conference.
We are very honored, Dr. Mariam Matar. We are very honored. And Prof. Chowdhury also, we are We are very honored. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. And if
Yeah.
you don't mind, sir, do you allow me to take a permission? Unfortunately, I explained earlier to Professor Ray that I have some commitment earlier from 6 o'clock, and I asked him that I will be late for 5 minutes. And again, I'm looking forward to receive more information about the wealth, which will be shared within a few minutes with the rest of the audience.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Mohammed. Thank you
very much. Wish you all the best, Dr. Vinod, and I'm sure you will be doing great, and looking forward to meet you soon.
Thank you, Dr. Mariam. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Have a lovely day ahead. Thank you very much. Stay safe, please. Bye-bye.
Excellent. It's great to have Dr. Mariam with us today, and the support since formation of Parkinson Society UAE. See, I just want to, before we start this group clinic and take questions from the specialists and MDT team here, I just want to share a few bits and bats, the hard work being done in Dubai, at King's College Dubai, in collaboration with the volunteers from Parkinson Society UAE. That see, this is just what since I started in Dubai, after 5 months of my clinics, everyone coming to me and saying that we never heard of this treatment, we never heard of the treatment. So what we did as a part of our National Parkinson Center of Excellence led by Professor Ray Chowdhury, we always do as a good clinical practice, we do a range of assessments on patients. It's a good clinical practice that will give us A, what is the current stage of the patient, and B, if we start any treatment, what's actually the efficacy of the treatment. So, you able to hear? Little louder. Sorry, no, with hyperglycemic. Right, and so the reason why we do these clinical assessments is A, number one, is a good clinical practice to see what actually the stage of the patient, and B, if we're starting advanced therapies like surgery, infusion, or pen injections, and whether they are actually useful to patients or not. Okay, you able to hear me now? Right. See, I'm not going to take so what we did, we looked at all our patients coming to us from all walks of life, where Joseph are going to share the details. So what we did, we collected a range of data from patients. I just want to share with you. So see, the first column is here, is the patient. We blinded the hospital number. So then we got age of the patient, gender of the patient, and race or nationality. Patients coming to us, we got geographically, whether UAE, Emirati patient, or an expat. And then I was interested to see what are their presenting symptoms are. Some Parkinson's patients come with a tremor. Some Parkinson's patients has no tremor, only slowness. Some Parkinson's patient has both symptoms. So the first thing I noticed, the patient coming to me and said, Dr. Vinod, I don't have a tremor. Please, I do have a Parkinson's. So that's what we need to see. We just looked what type of patients here. Akinetic means no tremor, and tremor. And importantly here, what struck me in UAE was year of symptoms, what date exactly the symptom was started, and year of diagnosis, when actually been given the diagnosis of Parkinson's. So you can clearly see when the symptom started, when the diagnosis been given, and year of treatment. And another interesting factor, which we don't often see in UK, number of doctors seen before diagnosis. So basically, back in Europe, UK, that once the GP noticed a symptom, that it'd been referred to a Parkinson specialist, we stamp the diagnosis. But you can clearly see how many doctors been seen. I can see there are 6 doctors, 6 neurologists been seen also. Then we got disease duration and stage of Parkinson's, and we look at non-motor symptom scale. Actually, Professor Chowdhury and our team at King's London designed this. Currently, it's in 56 languages. And we looked at patients with fatigue, patients with mood problems, patients with hallucinations, memory problems, GIT, Professor Gai Chung Fei is here if you want any questions after. Gastro symptoms like constipation, diarrhea, gastroparesis, and we look at urinary symptoms, sexual function. So this is one of the unmet need, unasked. No one asked this question for patients into the PD. When I started doing the scales, everyone started coming up with their problems. Then we have for pain and smell, total score, and quality of life. Patients with problems with activities of daily living, emotional well-being, stigma, social support. In social support is another striking feature here, whereas in UK, the social support is very equal to all. Here, Josefa, the Parkinson Society founder, will going to present the details, where it's very biased and skewed to one group of patients, not to other group of patients. And memory problems, communication, bodily discomfort, and total score. And we looked at depression, any young patients who've been diagnosed with Parkinson's having problems with depression, and also fatigue, any problems with fatigue. The fatigue and sleep, there are two different components. So someone says that I have problems with sleep, but they don't have tiredness. They say that, no, doctor, I never had a problem with sleep problems, but every day I'm very tired. So there are two different entities, so two different treatments for that. And we looked at Parkinson's sleep scale. We used that scale, again, designed by Professor Chaudhary and our team at King's. And this is very important. Pain in Parkinson's is revolutionizing the treatment options. King's pain scale, Professor Chaudhary will take all the questions. And we looked at individual domains and total pain scores. And this is the very striking in UAE. I have seen patients across the country coming from Abu Dhabi, Al Ain, Al Ras Khaimah. So what device-aided therapies? So how many patients aware of these advanced therapies? You can see all zeros. So we looked at it, that one, and how many patients actually are eligible for this treatment. So that's the data. Now I'm going to hand over the statistical analysis. I have to thank Ali from HeadSeat. There are so many people involved in doing the statistics, so many volunteers from Parkinson's groups and from Dubai Police Ambulance and everyone who actually helped to collate this data. It's a 10 people job, and my team at King's Dubai, Movement Disorders team, we have PD nurse specialist Neha, Madhya, Judith, Adele, where is a pharmacist here? Hiding, yeah, and we have Kislin and our own. So I'm going to leave it to Josefa to present the data. It's their hard work, full credit to the community. So you can just wait. Yeah, and they can video. That's 171 patients. That's the data.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. We'll now just talk about the Parkinson's pilot study, which was actually done on 171 patients who had visited the movement disorder clinic at King's College Hospital, London and Dubai. I hope I'm audible now. Okay, perfect. Thanks to Ali Al-Hawaii, of course, for the analysis. And thanks to the whole team, which had helped in collecting the data, starting from Dr. Vinod to all the volunteers and the whole staff at the Movement Disorder Clinic and King's College Hospital. Just to give you a brief about the study, this was about for 171 patients who have Parkinson's disease. This was done during the period 2019 to 2021. And the main determinants which were focused on was the health quality of life, the caregiver burden, and the societal impact of Parkinson's disease. These patients, as Dr. Vinod had mentioned a while ago, they come from different parts of the UAE. Some are from Dubai. Let's say they are starting from Abu Dhabi till the Emirate of Fujairah. The patients which were diagnosed as having Parkinson's disease according to the UK Parkinson's disease brain bank criteria were included. And at the same time, it was not only the patients, it was also the caregivers. The other studies which were done, it was done only on, or all studies focused only on Parkinson's patients. But what makes this stand out from the other studies is that even the caregivers were included. The methods that were used to collect the data, this was done during consultation in the clinic, following the standardized assessment protocols, which was including history to know where the patient is coming from, what race the patient is following, or where the patient is from. Of course, motor and non-motor symptoms scale were used as well, all thanks to Professor Chaudhry and his team, of course, for preparing the non-motor symptoms scale. Parkinson's fatigue scale and King's Parkinson's pain scale was also utilized, and the memory scale. And also the Parkinson's disease questionnaire 8, which is also known as PDQ-8, which most of those in healthcare will be able to relate to this. Apart from all this, the accompanying primary caregivers were also interviewed, and this was done based on validated burden scale for family caregivers, which is a short version. It includes a 10-point quick scale assessment to know the burden of caregivers. Talking about the results, the mean age, overall, Emiratis versus expats, and also going down to even the race that the patient is from. And also another factor that was looked into was the gender, be it male or female, and the mean duration of disease and the onset of symptoms to the start of treatment. Moving on to the number of neurologists that the patient has seen. And let's not forget levodopa, the main thing, the main petrol to keep the Parkinson's patient go on. What the dose of levodopa that the patient is taking. And then moving on to drug naive versus disease duration. There are many patients. As we move on, I will quickly brief you on how there are patients who are diagnosed. There are patients who have seen the neurologists, but are not on any treatment at all. Moving on to disease duration versus severity, how severe is the disease, and also the Parkinson's disease subtype, and the correlation between the severity of the disease duration versus the age of onset, and the highest prevalence of non-motor symptoms in males or females, and highest prevalence of non-motor symptoms in Emiratis or nationals versus expats. And the correlation between disease duration, disease severity, and fatigue. last but not least, correlation between disease duration, disease severity, and GIT. And here, of course, we have with us Dr. Guy Chun-Fei, who will be giving us input on that. Moving on, the correlation that was done, it was also done between disease duration, disease severity versus the sexual dysfunction, and the correlation between age of onset versus the SD, and then moving on to sleep versus fatigue, disease duration, disease severity versus fatigue, and falls and non-motor symptoms scale, and also the quality of life, and the disease duration, disease severity, and age of onset. These are the basic things. These are the basic correlations that were done, as you can see on the screen. Let's move on to the actual data. As you may see here, in total, the patients that, or the study was done on 171 patients. Out of them, we have 68 patients who are male and 54 which are female. And as it is well known throughout that Parkinson's disease affects more males than females, which follows the same here. Drilling down to the gender. Nationals versus expats. In this study, 52 out of 52 nationals, 22 were female and 30 were male, which of course, again, shows the similarity between the UAE nationals, or between UAE and also the other parts of the world. Going down to expats, there were 119 expats. Out of them, 32 were female and 82 patients were male. And this, of course, indicates that males are more likely to be exposed to Parkinson's, be it with expats or the nationals. Let's now see more into detail on the age and nationality. The overall age of 171 patients, the overall age is 57. Talking about the nationals, it is 49, whereas with the expats, it's 64. Now, there is one thing that, of course, I would like the whole panel to note this, and also the audience who are with us and everyone who has joined us on Zoom, to note that Parkinson's disease is known as disease of those who are elderly, who are above 60. But if you see, in the case of the UAE nationals, the overall age or the average age is 49, which is way less than 60. So, of course, I would like the panel to note this down, and I would request you to shed light on this. Of course, we have with us Professor Chaudhry, who will explain this a bit as well. Sure. Now, talking about the overall age, nationality, and nationality. Looking at the age of patients when diagnosed for each nationality, we can see that the Sudanese, Polish, and Italian have the oldest age, with the age of approximately or respectively 76, 79, and 81. As YOPD, which is young onset Parkinson's disease, they are from Philippines and the UAE nationals, with ages of 41 and 49 respectively. The main point here is that YOPD, which is young onset Parkinson's disease, it can possibly, I would say it's a red flag, specifically with Emiratis and Egyptian Arabs. This is, of course, based on the data which was collected. Moving on to the mean duration of disease. The overall mean duration of the disease is approximately 6 years. For expats, it is over 6 years. For Emiratis, it is actually less than 3 years. Talking about onset of symptoms to start of treatment. In this study, we can see that 57% of patients, which is 61 expats, they got treatment within a year. 31 expats, they got in 2 years. Rest in less than a year. With few patients, they took around 3 years to be treated. 70% of Emiratis, they tend to get treated most probably 2 years within the start of or within the onset of symptoms. And 30% of Emiratis, on the other hand, took 5 years for treatment after onset of symptoms. So imagine 5 years, even like the patient, he was diagnosed with Parkinson's, but for 5 years, he did not take any medication. By nationality, when we talk about start of treatment versus the onset of symptoms, we see that British expats, they tend to be the top nationality to get treated in less than 1 year of symptoms occurrence. On the other hand, the treatment in Emiratis, it got delayed by 2 to 5 years after the onset of symptoms. Talking about number of doctors seen before diagnosis. Just a second. The screen is shared. Just 1 second. No, just a second. So can you please open the presentation here? You'll have to open it again. Now I'm sharing the screen now. Now it is. They can see the screen. Just open the presentation.
No, this is the presentation. I think we should continue this. No, this is,
The whole thing went away. Now we'll have to open it.
here.
Now it is.
Yeah.
Now it is. Ali, is it visible now? Not yet? Which one is it? Not this one. No, go back to here. Go back to the Zoom screen. Yeah. Ali, is it okay now?
Let me say, I think there's a problem here. I said continue. No, that's not, don't worry. He's taking the points.
He's taking the points?
Yeah. I'll show once in the final.
Just 1 second. New share.
I'll show this one.
Ali, now it's okay?
Yeah, okay. Perfect.
That's okay. Okay. Let's talk about the number of doctors seen before diagnosis. Both Emirati and expats, they have seen more than 2 doctors before diagnosis. 50% of Emirati patients, they have mostly visited at least 4 neurologists before diagnosis. Emiratis, of course, they've dominated the highest number of patients visiting 4 neurologists compared to expats who have seen less than two neurologists before the confirmation of diagnosis. Oddly, there are 2 patients, one is Emirati and the other one is Sudanese, who have visited 7 doctors before diagnosis, which required special investigation of the causes. The average levodopa dose in UAE nationals versus expats, the Emiratis, they take less levodopa dose with an average of 473 milligrams. On the other hand, the expats, it's higher with an average dose of 874. There is one thing which I would want the panel to note this, that 15% of the total patients, like 15% of 171 patients, are not on any treatment at all. The Italians, they have the highest dose average with an average of 1,400, following them Sudanese with an average of 1,300, and then the Irish with an average of 1,126. The lowest 3 averages were for Egyptians with 0 levodopa given, following them the Emiratis with 474, and then the Filipinos with 538.8. Nearly all nationalities average was above 500 except for the Emiratis, which was 473. Drug naive versus disease duration. Overall, Emiratis and expats. The nationals, 17 out of 23, which is 80%, are not on any treatment at all, even after 2 to 3 years of onset of symptoms. One of them is not on treatment after 7 whole years. Talking about presenting symptoms in Emiratis versus expats, as overall, we can see that, of course, in Emiratis, the akinetic is more than the lower limb tremor, and then and also the mixed. Main thing here is that I would like the panel to note, and also the audience, that 31% of Emiratis, they have lower limb tremor onset, whereas 50% have akinetic dominant, whereas mixed Parkinson's disease dominates in expats. Out of 22, 13 Emirati females tend to have more lower limb tremor, and 75% of Emiratis suffer from akinetic dominant. This is a main point. This is one of the points that I would want, or I would request the panel to note it down and shed more light on it. By nationality, if we see the count of presenting symptoms, as you can see on the screen, screen, the mixed PD dominates over all patients, followed by, which is 42%, and then followed by 30% akinetic. And then Emirati female cohort, it showed lower limb tremor. Correlation between disease duration versus severity, it shows there is a correlation score of 0.77, which indicates high correlation between severity and age of disease. And as you're all aware, Parkinson's is a neurodegenerative disorder. And as the age of disease increases, the severity of the disease increases with that as well. The higher disease duration means the disease severity is stronger. And this is, of course, it follows the same point that I said a while ago. And in other words, if we have to sum this up, I would say that the Parkinson's disease severity, it progresses with duration of disease. Overall prevalence of non-motor symptoms in males and females. As you can see in the graph and on the screen, the sexual dysfunction predominates in both male and female patients. Fatigue is second most common non-motor symptom, followed by urinary and gastro symptoms. Talking about sexual dysfunction, it is a major concern in both Emiratis and expat patients. And fatigue seems to be the second most common symptoms in Emiratis and urinary problems in expats. Overall, complete awareness of all treatments, 91% of overall patients are not aware of Levodopa. This is one point that I would like the panel to note it down as well. 77% have never heard of apomorphine, whereas only 44% are aware or have heard about the deep brain surgery. Talking about that eligible, based on the guidelines, 5-to-1 criteria, 42% of Emirati patients and 58% of expats are eligible for device-aided therapies. Talking about awareness, 98% of the national patients have never heard of apomorphine, whereas 33% of expats are aware about the apomorphine treatment. The striking feature is that none of the Emirati patients are aware of the Levodopa treatment in the United Arab Emirates, whereas only 13% of expats are aware of this treatment. Most of them are British expats. Are they London patients? They're expats. Talking about the device-aided therapies, which is deep brain surgery, Emiratis versus expats, 69% of expats and 25% of Emirati patients, they're aware of deep brain surgery. Anxiety and depression, which is something that whoever has Parkinson's is aware of this and what it does to a person. As you can see in the slide and the graph, expats, they have scored very high in depression compared to the Emirati nationals. And here on the screen, you can see the predictors of quality of life in Emiratis versus expats. Social stigma and emotional well-being predominates in Emirati patients, as you can see in the graph. Talking about the correlation done between disease duration, disease severity versus falls. It was noticed that high falls were noticed in patients with high disease severity and duration. And this is one of the points that was discussed a while ago, that as the duration increases, as the disease, at the same time, disease severity increases. Correlation between disease duration, disease severity versus non-motor symptoms. Of course, thanks to Professor Ray and his team for the non-motor symptom scale, which was used to collect all this data. We see a strong correlation of non-motor symptoms with disease duration and severity. And also the data that shows quality of life worsens, it goes down with disease duration or severity as time goes on. And this, as I said, Parkinson's is a neurodegenerative disorder. So the quality of life goes down, or the quality of life decreases or worsens as the disease duration or disease severity increases. Talking about fatigue domain and non-motor symptoms, this shows the slide that you can see on the screen. The fatigue domain and non-motor symptoms and the PFS-16 are very correlated. Correlation between anxiety, depression versus disease duration and disease severity. It shows depression compared to anxiety. It worsens as the disease progresses. Now, there is a striking feature. There are so many, but this is one of them. Talking about fatigue versus disease duration and disease severity. Fatigue is independent of disease severity and disease duration. I would ask the panel to note this down as well and talk more about this. The correlation between disease duration, disease severity, and the gastro symptoms. The gastro symptoms worsen with disease duration and disease severity. And this is where Dr. Kai Chen-Fei would be sharing his thoughts. The data also shows the sexual dysfunction. It worsens with disease duration. So as time passes on, the sexual dysfunction worsens. Talking about age of onset versus sexual dysfunction, there is no obvious factor or any, the data does not show anything in detail on that. Correlation between disease duration, disease severity, and the total pain score. Pain severity is very high in patients with advanced Parkinson's. By this, we have reached to the end of this session of explaining about the study, which was done on 171 patients. And the data, of course, was analyzed by Ali Al-Hawai. Thank you for the analysis. And before I conclude, I would like to thank King's College Hospital London Dubai Movement Disorders team, headed by Dr. Vinod, and the King's College London National Parkinson's Center of Excellence, headed by Professor Ray Chowdhury, and Parkinson's UAE, and the higher colleges of technology in Dubai, and several other universities, and the volunteers, and special thanks to UAE Genetic Disorders Association, and a special thanks also to Dubai Ambulance for hosting us today, and for all the support that they give to us and to everyone in the Emirate of Dubai. Hats off to them and hats off to everyone who are the frontline heroes during, before, and post-pandemic. Thank you so much. Over to Dr. Emarat. Professor, if you have any questions, the team, if you have anything that you would like to add, I will just pass on the mic to you.
Firstly, the commercial team itself, all teams for working with Dr. himself for running the study. I mean, it was eye-opening and quite shocking, actually, for me to hear some of the data. Several things I made notice of, which I think perhaps we should think of. One is the very high prevalence of young onset Parkinson's. Your mean age of people with Parkinson's in the Emirati population is substantially lower, in the 40s. Normally, the mean age for Parkinson's in the Western population is around in the 60s and 70s. So this suggests that there's a much higher prevalence, at least we don't have the formal statistics of it, of young onset Parkinson's in this group. And that brings the prospect of genetics. Young onset Parkinson's patients
have a threefold higher incidence of genetic origin as opposed to late onset Parkinson's. So the first thing would be to look at in future, and this is something I was talking with Her Highness, was that to run a genomic study, particularly in the young onset group, because we know now that there are monogenic genes with variable penetrance in Parkinson's. There are multiple genes which are recessive, but with variable penetrance as well. And then there are also genes associated with Parkinsonism. So it'll be really interesting and important to run such a study, because you have now got this fantastically characterized cohort where you measured the motor symptoms, the non-motor symptoms, etc. And this is the sort of study people do in various ethnic groups. And you've now got that, because why is it that the Emirati group has such a younger onset of Parkinson's would be an interesting, a very important question to address. So that's one thing that stood out for me. The second thing that struck me was the levodopa dose. The levodopa dose appeared to be substantially lower in the Emirati group compared to the Western or the expat group that you looked at there. And again, this raises two questions in my mind. Why is this so? Levodopa is the gold standard of treatment of Parkinson's, has been since the 1960s. So why is it that the Emirati group, whose severity of Parkinson's seems similar to the expat group, are not getting enough levodopa? Is it because the doctors are not prescribing enough because they're not sure? Or is it because there is a phenomenon called Levodopa Phobia, where either the doctors or the patients are scared of taking levodopa? This has been well described. We've written papers on it called Levodopa Phobia. And this can be a problem because levodopa is a gold standard. If you have diabetes, anti-diabetic tablets or insulin, if you have hypertension, you have to have blood pressure tablets. So similarly, if you have Parkinson's, you have to be on levodopa. That's the bottom line. So why is it the dose is low? The second factor is a more interesting phenomenon of pharmacogenetics, because there's one enzyme called COMT, C-O-M-T, which breaks down levodopa in the body. And the COMT gene exists in three forms, or what call it three alleles: high activity, low activity, mixed activity. If a race or ethnic group carries the high activity COMT, they will break down the levodopa very fast. So in these people, you need higher doses of levodopa. So is there a genetic variant in the COMT activity in this particular group? And COMT gene polymorphism is very easy to analyze. We've done studies like that between the Black Parkinson population versus the white population. One of my fellows just completed a PhD project on it. There is also data from Africa, for instance, of variations between the COMT polymorphism between racial groups there versus perhaps Western Caucasian groups. So I think that's a fundamentally important question to answer. Why is it? Is it levodopa phobia? Is it pharmacogenetics? Or is it something else? Just people are not prescribing any levodopa, perhaps dyskinesias, side effects. And the third thing that also I thought was very troublesome was the delay in the diagnosis. Majority of the patients saw 2 to 7 doctors before their diagnosis is made. This might be a cultural thing that patients may not believe the diagnosis of Parkinson's and go to another doctor. It happens quite a bit because it is a lifelong diagnosis. It depends on how the doctors or the nurse specialist is giving the diagnosis. So that's an area. How can we look into more? I'm more interested in the answers than the problem. So the one can look into that by a simple study, by using a formula, using a interview called Common Sense Model of Leventhal. It's a simple 9-domain question where you ask and find out what might be the barriers. Why is it so? Because only if you know the barriers, you can address the management. So that would be really another interesting problem. Why is there so much delay? Then I wrote down lower limb tremor, I think you mentioned. And lower limb, people presenting with lower limb tremor is often a clinical phenomenon we see in patients who carry the Parkin gene mutation. People who have Parkin mutation, and more recently, it's been also described with another mutation. There are up to 30 mutations in Parkinson's gene now described. I would definitely look for Parkin mutation in this particular group because they might be carrying the Parkin mutation, in which case the treatment needs to be tailored. And this is, again, the so-called genomic aspect of personalized medicine. Personalized medicine exists in different forms. You can have it clinically, so one size doesn't fit all. If I get Parkinson's, I may not have a tremor. If Anna gets Parkinson's, she might have a lot of tremor. So how you give treatment will be variable. What I get should be different to what she gets. And similarly, if you have Parkin mutation, they're very prone to dyskinesias, for instance. You tailor down the levodopa dose, et cetera, et cetera. So that would be a very interesting observation, which I'm sure Dr. Mehta with his amazing team can accomplish here. The other two interesting things were the high prevalence of the akinetic problem. So it seems like the Emirati Parkinson population don't have much tremor. Although I think in general population, when you ask those of you not into the medical side, if we asked you, what do you think about Parkinson's? You always think about somebody who's a bit stooped with a tremor, don't you? But it's actually interesting to see the majority of the patients here don't have that. Could this be a manifestation of epigenetic, genetic, and other factors in this particular group? Another amazing, important question that one needs answering. And the final thing that I wrote down here was the absence of awareness of device-aided infusion therapy, because it's very easy to do deep brain stimulation as a quick fix. Deep brain stimulation, you have Parkinson's, you go to the doctor, they know about deep brain stimulation. It's plugging, electrodes into the brain, like putting in a pacemaker in both sides of the brain. It works quickly. It's a quick fix. Young onset Parkinson patients particularly like it because it's not also visible. Partly you have the implantation, but they are not getting the right service because everybody patient like that needs to be told, would you like 2 holes in your head and a needle going into your brain with 1 to 2% risk of hemorrhage in the brain versus a simple treatment like apomorphine, which is no different to diabetic patients taking insulin, Or would you take levodopa infusion therapy, a very safe treatment, if it is done through people like Dr. Chung Fei sitting here, world-class gastroenterologist, but we can bring that assistant through the King Center. All it needs is a simple operation to get the tube in, and then you got levodopa, the gold standard treatment, going in as normal. Why aren't the patients being told that these options are also there? If they're not told, then automatically, if you're told, okay, I've got Parkinson's, deep brain stimulation is the only option, then you'll go for DBS. And this is the same thing that's happened in a scandalous manner in the US for many, many years, before patients are now waking up to the fact that there are other forms of treatment available. So I think that might be another point that might be worth exploring. So I think that those were a vast amount of information there, particularly given that this is new information coming out from this area, this region. It's definitely worthy of publishing, but I think there are much more questions that you need addressing. In relation to this, the analysis, the only thing I'll say, it'd be nice to get statistical measures, like are they significantly different? I thought the levodopa dose would be from what you described. You've got reasonable numbers. If you apply all the corrections for small samples, you should be able to get good stats values from there. And again, quality of life, non-motor symptoms, HNY, which you showed, tallies with what we know, disease duration and other things. As it gets worse, these symptoms gets worse.
Professor, what about the young onset Parkinson?
Yep.
You see in the Emirati population, that seems to be higher.
Yeah, well, this is the point I was trying to make. Is it because there are either genetic or epigenetic factors? And that's what you need to look at. Particularly what you said, lower limb tremor.
Yeah.
I would be definitely looking at their Parkin gene first thing. It might be a Parkin presentation, or it could be one of the other. Why are they requiring, or why are they getting low levodopa? Is it because levodopa is broken down fast? Is it because of the COMP gene polymorphism? So all of these things would need simple blood tests, really, and that can sort it out. At least you'll get some of the answers. So those would be the points. And I've been talking for a long time. Sure, Guy and Anna and others will have comments.
Sure. Before we just move on, I would like to share something that the government has introduced the Emirati genome, let's say, and the government has actually asked everyone to come up, all the UAE nationals to come up, give their samples to see the complete, to see their complete genes. So
It's
that
like
God
doing a
forbid,
full survey.
yes. So,
GUS. We did something similar in the UK called the 1000 genome
but
project.
this is like for the whole,
100,000.
for the whole.
Yes, but yeah, I think this would be part of it. But I think you should still run a very focused, hypothesis-driven genomic study in that group, because you've got the phenotypes now.
Of course, yes.
So you can do a classic genotype phenotype study.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Dr. Guy, before we move on.
Thank you very much to everyone who can collaborate with this excellent study, and also for the support we've received. And I think Professor Ray Cherry's points are very, very salient. I think the most striking thing to me as a slight outsider is the marked changes in terms of age of onset. And this is probably more a question which will be addressed in the future, but also to Dr. Miriam Mehta, is whether the earlier age of onset is due to the high incidence of consanguinity in the UAE population. And by that, I mean, is there more marriage between distant relations within the UAE population than there is in expatriates? So that might be something to look into and might partly explain why the onset is so much younger in the EU population. And I think it's great about the genome project you're doing. And as Professor Chowdhury said, we've had a very successful 100,000 genome project in the UK, looking at rare diseases and cancers as well, and got very good data coming out of that. And very lastly, the other thing which was interesting was the fatigue doesn't seem to correlate with stage of disease, which I think is interesting. And the COM to data, I think, are very, very valuable. Use a very similar system in treating patients with inflammatory bowel disease. We measure the enzyme that breaks down the active drug, and then we tailor the drug treatment exactly according to what the enzyme levels show. So I think if you do that in the future, that might be the future of personalized medicine, certainly for Parkinson's patients. It may partly explain why you have a lower levels of levodopa. In other words, you have maybe a lower COMT or maybe higher COMT measure. Thank you.
We have a patients waiting to hear, from specialists and MDT here. Just, I want to share with Professor Chaudhary. Since I started doing clinics here since last 2 years, it's working in London, I've noticed a huge difference, say, in UK. Maybe Professor Chaudhary might comment on this. We never seen a very rare lower limb onset of symptoms, whereas here, striking Emirati female patients coming up with just a twitch in the leg. So that's what they say, a twitch in the leg. Then they go to a doctor. It's not culturally, Professor Chaudhary, what they said. A Dr. A saying you don't have Parkinson's, Dr. B saying you have Parkinson's, Dr. C is saying, no, it may be wrong, it may be right. Number 4 is saying that wait until it comes back to your upper limb. If it's not coming back to your upper limb, it's not Parkinson's. So that's what I heard from patients. And number 3, 95% of patients we had all are advanced Parkinson's disease clinics. So we are doing here. That's what patients been referred to us, advanced PDs, but still 15% of patients, they're not on any treatment. So the statistical analysis who have done, Ali needs to look into it. Patients who are not on treatment, what is the duration of the disease? That's very important as well. And another 5th point striking is, they just give one option for patients, whereas British expats or someone who has some connections in UK and Europe, they're coming up with, yes, I know levodopa, I know apomorphine, I know DBS. But here, the local patients, they're coming back to me and say that, what options do you have? In UK, as a good clinical practice, we give them 3 options. And at the end of the day, we have a guidelines for which patient requires which therapy. Then we follow the guidelines. We don't have that guidelines here. So that's what we need to look into with the Parkinson Society here, so that it will be helpful so many patients to choose, make them part of the treatment process, informed consent. And another striking feature, which I need to thank, is the pain in PD. They have different phenotypes. Say for young Emirati patients having say for example, if you have tremor, then the pain in the upper limb is quite acceptable. If you have a no tremor, pain coming in at night time, is it because of stiffness or anything else? We need to correlate that one. And also, we thank Professor Chaudhary and Dr. Guy for giving them insight, so that we need to work on that one. And especially Dr. Mariam Mathur is involved in genetics. This data will be highly useful. It may not be Parkinson. We can find another one in Emirati patients. That's another. So it's an amount wealth of data. Now we have Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So there are so many genetics. That is currently, in UK, we are very interested in genomics, and I don't want to. We'll come back and we present the final data with proper correlations to advice from all the stakeholders. I want to ask Dr. Vijay here, is one of the Parkinson specialists from India here. And do you see anything lower limb tremors, Dr. Vijay, in Indian population or Asian population in your experience? You can take your mask and you can say you're maintaining 2 meters distance. Indian patients. We have lots of expat Indians here in UAE as well.
there are so many things are happening now. How I think overall this is a good work with عنوان. I think so.
Very bad news that doing Windows shopping, seven neurologists still not on treatment. I think that's a good eye opener. And final one, I definitely take the question from patients.
I think what was also you mentioned there was very important to stress is the lack of awareness amongst patients of the available treatment. So I think there needs to be a very concerted campaign so patients are aware one of their symptoms, so they need to go to their doctor to be diagnosed, and two, what are the available treatment. So there needs to be more targeted information towards patients who need this sort of thing.
Last point, I mean, see, as a Parkinson specialist treating patients in Dubai, what makes me more, surprised, pleasantly surprised? You have these treatment options in your country since last 10 years. 10 years, you have this treatment. So why 100% of Emirati patients doesn't know about levodopa or apomorphine? Why is it only 90%, only 5% of patients know about other treatments? This is actually, it's a big eye opener. So I pass it on to Prof. Chaudhary.
I was just going to say that
it's another study you should do, because it's always important to find what the barriers are, because we've done similar studies in the UK and elsewhere. It can be simply done by, like you apply the questionnaire, you apply that CSM, it's a 9-point question, very nicely gives you the barriers. Is it non-awareness that Guy just mentioned? Is it because they're scared of levodopa, or is it just because doctor is sending, wait, what are you waiting for? It's Parkinson's, you don't need to wait. So that questionnaire, it's called CSM. It's actually really important in this sort of area, because where you don't know, apply that and find the barriers. Then you go to the licensing authorities, then you go to Her Highness and say, look, these are the barriers. Can we do something about it? And that's a paper by itself that can be written. One other thing that struck me about the lower limb tremor in young onset Parkinsonism is that always worked excluding the possibility of Wilson's disease, because people with Wilson's present sometime with lower limb dystonia and tremor. However, it's more dystonic tremor rather than, and we know the prevalence of Wilson is quite higher in this area as well. So it's worth just keeping that in mind. Done.
We want to the patients. Actually, I know. First, we give the priority to the patients here, then we take online. We are very happy. Just 1 second. We have Mr. Daniel here. He's one of the caregiver and excellent. You don't have a question,
Ahmed.
No, I think it's better to take a mic and please. So we have all the MDT team here, physio, dietitian, so on. Any questions, specialists?
First of all, I would like to thank you. Today we are fortunate enough for such an eminent panel of professionals. The one here I'm talking about the operation of UAE. And I have seen Dr. Guy, I'm sorry, that there are a lot of people who are suffering from acidity, and in your medical parlance, you call it GERD. So they say you can take Pantazol and that should solve the problem. But it was supposed to be on as basis, but I think that's become on a regular basis. Like if you don't take it, you face a lot of problems there. So what could be a remedy for that, especially for the patients who are suffering from Parkinson's disease? And while I'm on this, I would like to say something in general. Like I'm a resident of UAE for the past 45 years. So I have seen the growth and development of UAE. And coming to the question of why people are visiting 2 doctors or 3 doctors or 4 doctors, the reason being is a lack of awareness.
people have not been aware of there's something called a Parkinson disease. They just ignore it because they have not been educated or they have not been aware of this. And secondly, there could also be a reason for social stigma, that if they come to know about it and what will people, what will the society say about it. And lastly, I would like to say that it is a blessing that in UAE now we have got a hospital of the caliber of King's London Hospital, where we have visiting eminent doctors from King's College London and who are knowledgeable. So we don't have to do, like he said, window shopping from one doctor to another. Because I would say the caliber of doctors here also, I'm sorry to say that, is not up to the mark. Because they are not able to advise a patient that this should be the treatment. Like the other day, I was telling Dr. Vinod Mehta, I said, may I call you a miracle man? He said, no, it's not a miracle. It is the proper diagnosis of the disease and the proper treatment. So I would say that there has to be dissemination of this particular disease, and that this is curable. Of course, it cannot be treated 100%, but at least the progression of the disease can be checked. So I would like to have your comments on, especially on here.
I think you've raised some very important points there, and I think also raised some of the. Thank you very much for your questions. You've raised some very important questions with regard. You've raised very important questions with regard both in terms of information, lack of awareness of information, but also sort of quality of care, some of which I cannot address, but I will try and address the areas of which I know about. With regards to gastroesophageal reflux or GERD, I think this is a very common condition which can exist both in patients with Parkinson's and those without as well. And what I would suggest is that in certain patients with Parkinson's, they can get the worsening of their GERD as a result of gastroparesis. But generally, the management of GERD is a combination of lifestyle advice and the use of medication. And if you're having persistent symptoms which require recurrent doses of medication, then I suggest you see a specialist that can perform some investigations, such as endoscopy, to see whether you've got, for example, like a hiatus hernia, and also signs of severe acid damage, and they will tailor the treatment according to investigations. In very resistant cases, you can also have specialist treatments such as pH manometry tests, where they measure the actual amount of acid within the gullet. So the bottom line is see a specialist who will then guide you and offer you personalized treatment based on your symptoms and your investigations. I did not say the question.
See, Dr. I'm saying that of late I've heard that there is some sort of a treatment available that and it is one-time treatment, and we will relieve you of this acidity problem. So is there any fact in that, or is it just a myth?
There are some experimental treatments, but I don't think they are widely accepted as being common treatment. The most common treatment, which doesn't involve medication, is the use of surgery, which can be done laparoscopically by keyhole surgery. But there are some experimental treatments, for example, the use of magnets within the esophagus to limit the amount of acidity within the esophagus.
Well, coming to the level of confidence of doctors, I'm not talking about elsewhere. I would not think the country where the doctor is asking the patient, should I start Levodopa? What can I say to that?
So should I start?
Should I start Levodopa, or should I continue with acetate?
I think that's probably a question for Professor Chowdhury and Dr. Vidon.
Look, I have seen a couple of doctors asking this question to the patient. How can the patient handle this? And it is come across, doctors like Mehta here, who know what they're talking about and who diagnose the treatment, the disease, and advise proper treatment. So this is what I'm saying. Maybe in some cases, some people had suffered because of this, and they are not very sure of visiting doctors who don't specialize on the smoke.
I think I understand your frustration, and I think obviously there needs to be better awareness amongst the local population and amongst the Parkinson's population in terms of what treatment is available. And I think perhaps we should maybe move on to other questions.
Yeah, I guess
Unless Ray or
because he raised this question, acetate as an anticholinergic. Actually, we shouldn't be giving to any elderly patients. Fasting. The fasting you mentioned. Fasting you mentioned. Actually, we don't use it for elderly patients because it's an anticholinergic. It's anticholinergic means it absorbs all your choline and makes your Parkinson's or memory problems worse. And Chaudhary might answer your question whether why doctors are,
I think, thank you for your question. I think both Dr. Chupa and Dr. Mehta are being very polite. If a doctor is asking, should I ask that we need to go back to medical school? And probably come and train under my group. Then you teach him how to manage Parkinson's. As regards passive time, nobody with Parkinson's, not just older patients, even younger patients.